All right, so this is part 2 of graphing. So this is going to have everything. We're going to be graphing just sines and cosines, or we're going to be messing with the amplitude, we're going to be messing with the period, the phase shift, the midline. Again, just a quick refresher, anything on the inside is going to horizontally affect our graph. Anything on the outside is going to vertically affect our graph. And personally, I do the vertical aspects of your graph first, and then I jump into the horizontal aspects. So let's go through this one. First thing is, if it starts in this form, don't love it because it kind of doesn't have this form, which is what I'm more familiar with. So I'm going to adjust that -1 out here. And then the second thing I have to do is I really need to take any variable or any value that's attached to my variable, and I got to factor it out. So first thing is we're going to have a 2 sine. We're going to factor the 4 off. So if we divide this by 4, we're going to have to divide that by 4, which is going to make it a pi over 8. And then that -1, we're going to shift back there. Okay, so all the pieces. And again, I'm going to put the pieces in the same order as kind of our letters here, but when I graph it, I'm going to do my vertical pieces first and then my horizontal pieces second. So amplitude. The amplitude is going to be 2. My period is going to be 2 pi divided by 4, which makes it a pi over 2. My phase shift, I'm going to abbreviate that with PS. So my phase shift is going to be left pi over 8. So a negative pi over 8, or left pi over 8. And then our midline is going to be down 1, so -1. Okay, so I am going to shift left and I'm going to shift down. So I'm going to kind of plan ahead for that a little bit, where I'm going to give myself some space to the left and I'm going to give myself some space below, because my midline is the very first thing that I like to take care of, and that is a 1. So my graph is going to fluctuate around there. That's my amplitude is going to go up and down from there. And then, so that's my midline is down 1. And then from there, my graph is going to go down 2 and up 2 because of the amplitude. All right, so we're going to range between a -3 and a +1. All right, so we've taken care of the vertical aspect of it. Now the period. Period is me just going 1, 2, 3, 4, and marking down my period. Pi over 2, cut it in half. That's pi over 4, cut it in half. Pi over 8. That's 1/8, 2/8, 3/8. Okay, so my graph should fit in this window right here. Right, is what it should fit because of my period. So that is going to be pi over 2, but we're going to shift it, and it's still going to be pi over 2, or period, but we're going to shift it because of our phase shift. So this phase shift right here is going to back here, and then my whole graph is going to fit right there. So we're graphing sine. Sine starts on the line. So here's my basic sine graph. So sine starts on the line. That line is our midline. Well, our midline shifted. So we should have been starting here, but we're going to bump it back. All right, and then a sine goes to a high point, and then the midline, low point, midline. So starting on the midline, we got shifted back, pi over 8, and then we're going to go to a high point, back to the midline, low point, back to the midline. And that is one full cycle for a sine. All right, so our graph would have been here, but it got shifted back pi over 8, so it's still that exact same period, just got shifted. And we went, our midline got shifted down 1, but we went up 2, back to the midline, and then down 2 from there because of our amplitude. All right, so that's our first graph. Second graph, gonna have kind of a similar look to it. So we got this. We're graphing cosine. Cosine typically starts at a high point and then it kind of drops down from there. But again, I don't love the form for that. Let's figure out really what we got. I'm going to be bumping that 4, and it is a positive 4, so I'm going to be bumping that over here. The negative is actually attached to the 2, which is going to vertically reflect our cosine graph. And then I also have to factor off a half. So dividing a half is like multiplying by a 2. So that pi is going to become a 2 pi. And if you're not quite sure, if you distribute this back in, the 1/2 would match perfectly on the x, but 1/2 of 2 pi would get you your pi. So if it doesn't feel right, just double check that the math goes back to the original. And then here's your 4. All right, so amplitude is going to be 2, not the negative. The negative is going to vertically reflect it, but it's not your amplitude. Period. Period's going to be 2 pi divided by the b. So 2 pi divided by 1/2 is actually, this again, the same thing as multiplying by the reciprocal. So our period's going to be 4 pi. Our phase shift is going to be right 2 pi. So 2 pi. And then our midline is, everything's going to be up 4. All right, so let's graph that, and again we're going to shift up and to the right, so we'll give ourselves some space up and maybe give ourselves a little extra space to the right. So we are up 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. New graph, new kind of focus is there. And then we're going to go up 2 from there, down 2. So I just kind of, the numbers that I throw in are just the numbers for my amplitude. So we're going to range from 2, 4, and 6. All right, so our graph is going to fluctuate between 2 and 6. So horizontally, we've taken care of all the vertical pieces. We did our midline first, our amplitude second, and then we're going to go out 1, 2, 3, 4, and that is our period. Period's 4 pi. We'll cut it in half. 2 pi, cut it in half, pi. So 1 pi, 2 pi, 3 pi. All right, so that's our normal graph, except everything is going to shift right pi over 2. So everything is going to shift. So I got to kind of extend my graph out to fit my one full cycle. So 1, 2. So 5 pi, 6 pi. All right, so we're going to go from 2 pi to 6 pi when we graph this thing. And we are graphing a reflected cosine. So cosine should start at a high point. Our basic cosine would have looked like that. But that point's going to reflect down. So we're going to start at a low point, but it got shifted to the right. And then we're going to hit, so instead we're kind of down here. And graphing that is what we got going on. So we're hitting a midpoint, high point, midpoint, low point. And that is our graph. Okay, and that is one full cycle with all the different transformations and translations going on. All right, that's it. Thanks.